We often hear about how religion has inspired art, helped build civilizations, and given people comfort during hard times. And sure, that's a fair part of the story. But there's another side to it that rarely gets told, especially not in public conversations. The part where religion didn't just slow things down, it actively blocked progress. Not accidentally, not by coincidence, but by design. Because control depends on people staying in place, not asking questions, not challenging authority, not growing beyond the box they've been handed. Take science, for example, one of the clearest markers of human progress. Our ability to understand the world, test ideas, improve lives. But for centuries, questioning the natural world was treated as a threat, not a curiosity. The church didn't just reject science, it punished it. Galileo is the name we all know, but his story wasn't unique. He was forced to recant his observations because they contradicted the idea that the Earth was the center of the universe. He had a telescope and data. The church had scripture and fear. Guess which one won at the time? Now multiply that across generations. How many ideas were never written down? How many questions were never asked? How many people were afraid to think differently because thinking itself became dangerous? It's not just a historical footnote. It's a long shadow over what might have been. And it wasn't just science. Take medicine. There was a time when disease was thought to be punishment for sin. Plagues weren't met with public health systems. They were met with prayer, fasting, and often blame. Sometimes, entire communities were scapegoated while people died preventable deaths. When doctors began to suggest that illness might come from germs instead of moral failing, religious institutions weren't always thrilled. Because if suffering isn't divine punishment, then what does that say about the need for redemption? Think about how progress depends on doubt, on trial and error, on the ability to say, "I was wrong," and move forward. But religion, by its nature, is structured around certainty. Fixed truths, declared once and for all, resistant to change. That rigidity might offer comfort to some, but it comes at a cost. And that cost is curiosity, innovation, freedom. Consider education. Access to knowledge should be a good thing, right? But in many religious contexts, knowledge was something to control, not share. Books were chained to pulpits, literally. Translations of sacred texts into common languages were often banned. The logic was simple. If people could read for themselves, they might think for themselves. And once they start thinking, they start questioning. And that's where control starts to slip. There's this old assumption that religion and morality go hand in hand, that without faith, we'd have chaos. But the historical record paints a more complicated picture. Institutions that claimed moral authority often backed some of the most brutal systems imaginable. Inquisitions, crusades, witch hunts, slavery. These weren't fringe movements. They were mainstream, supported, endorsed, and justified using scripture. Progress in human rights didn't come from religious texts. It came from people pushing against them. And let's talk about women. So much human potential has been suppressed under religious ideas about gender roles. In many traditions, women were denied education, autonomy, and even basic rights because it was believed they were spiritually inferior. Entire half of the human race, sidelined for centuries, not because they lacked intelligence or drive, but because doctrine said their place was at home, in silence, under submission. Think about how long it took for girls to be allowed in schools in certain regions, how long it took for women to speak in places of worship. And even now, in many parts of the world, religion is used to justify child marriage, unequal laws, and restrictions on education. That's not ancient history. That's happening today. And this isn't just about the past. Even now, progress in areas like climate science, reproductive rights, and education is held back by religious lobbying, Policies that could benefit millions are stalled or blocked outright because they conflict with belief systems written in a time before electricity, antibiotics, or the concept of individual freedom. The pattern is clear. Whenever progress challenges the existing power structure, religion steps in as a shield for the status quo, not always out of malice, but out of fear. Fear that the world might outgrow the stories it once needed. Fear that reason might replace revelation, and that fear is powerful. But the irony is, human progress didn't stop because people stopped believing. It stopped because belief became mandatory, because it wasn't enough to have faith. Everyone else had to fall in line with it too. Dissent wasn't just disagreement, it was heresy. And heresy had consequences. This isn't about blaming individuals who find comfort in religion. It's about recognizing systems that prioritize obedience over understanding, that discourage change in a world that's constantly changing. And when you freeze your worldview, you freeze the people inside it. Every time progress poked its head up, there was resistance. When people proposed heliocentrism, evolution, vaccinations, abolition, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, there was always a religious pushback. Not from everyone, of course, but from the structures of power that had the most to lose. Because progress requires letting go of certainty, letting go of fear, letting go of the idea that the answers are already written down. And that's not easy when your worldview is built around divine authority. One of the most overlooked ways religion slowed progress was by offering easy answers to hard questions. Why are we here? What happens after death? Why do people suffer? Instead of, we don't know, religion said, here's the answer. Now stop asking. But those hard questions are exactly where growth happens. It's the struggle that moves us forward, not the certainty that holds us back. In a way, progress is unnatural. It asks us to rethink what we've always believed, to admit we were wrong, to leave behind what feels safe. And religion, for all its emotional power, often tells us not to do that, to stay put, to trust, to obey. But human history doesn't belong to those who obeyed. It belongs to those who questioned, who doubted, who stepped outside the lines and paid the price for it. The heretics, the rebels, the thinkers, the scientists, the dreamers. They're the ones who drag the species forward, often against religious resistance. So the question isn't whether religion helped or hurt human progress. It's how much further along we'd be if questioning wasn't punished, if doubt wasn't taboo, if thinking for yourself had always been a virtue, not a vice. Progress is not just about technology or inventions. It's about expanding the circle of who counts, who gets to speak, who gets to learn, who gets to live freely. And for too long, religion narrowed that circle. That's changing now. But the echoes of that long resistance still shape the present, and recognizing that isn't bitterness, it's clarity. Because you can't move forward until you see what's been holding you back. In the end, progress isn't a straight line. It's a struggle against inertia, against fear, against silence. And understanding how religion played a role in that struggle doesn't mean erasing the past. It means learning from it, so we don't repeat it, or worse, defend it.